welcome everyone. Good morning. This is Naila. I'm one of your co-hosts for the workshop today. I'm the Global Programs Manager at the Impact Hub Network, which means that I oversee our global portfolio of 30 plus programs every year that run in different geographic locations. So I'm going to be sharing our expertise and guiding you through some hopefully very interesting discussions today, and passing it on to my colleague Tom.
Thanks, Naila. So I'm a capacity building lead at Impact Hub Global Team. So I work with Impact Hubs and similar organizations that are supporting entrepreneurs and social entrepreneurs so that we can understand what's really working in the support that our network can offer to the entrepreneurial community and develop ways to disseminate what's working through different capacity building experiences, online curricula, trainings, workshops. So I've been at Impact Hub for 2 years now, working in the network development team. So very happy to be here with you today.
The objectives of the session of today, and I'm hoping that's what you came for, we are going to be improving our understanding about social enterprise support programs. So following up on our previous session where we looked at what social enterprises are and how to support social enterprises, we are going to go in depth into entrepreneurial journey and how entrepreneurs develop and how to support them at every stage. We will acquire skills, tools, and methodologies to design social enterprise support programs. Just to remind you that we're going to be focusing throughout this session and throughout the whole Better Incubation program on startup stage. And I'm going to go deeper and tell you what startup stage means in our case later on. We will hear some inspirational case studies from two different programs and two different organizations inside the Impact Hub family. We will introduce some recommendations for incubation programs and how to support entrepreneurs at startup stage. And we will have some considerations for designing and developing incubation programs. And spoilers alert, you will have the opportunity to do some design yourself today as well. We're going to the next slide, Tom, please. Yes. So we're going to start discussing what we call the entrepreneurial journey in the next hour. And we're going to do so by discussing some theory and then going into group reflections, and then discussing some theory and then going into group reflections. So, I'm going to try not to go into too much theory altogether, because I know that's a little bit tiring sometimes. But if something that you hear doesn't ring a bell, or you disagree, or because this is not science, right? So there's different opinions, there's different impressions, there's organizations that call things differently. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you how we have codified what we call the entrepreneurial journey and the learning inside the Impact Hub network by consulting many of the Impact Hubs. We have 100 plus Impact Hubs in the network. And we have gone through a codification journey of 2 years, trying to understand, how to find a common ground and a common understanding of the entrepreneurial journey and what being in each stage means and how to support the entrepreneurs. But I don't know, and we have very interesting and enriching conversations with Chiara, for example, from EVN, about how different organizations name things differently. So I'm going to invite you all the time to interrupt me, to reflect, to write in the chat, like, no, that's not how we understand things. And we will build on each other. Yeah. So this is in no intention, this is a one-way street where I'm sharing knowledge with you. This is a conversation. So basically, we understand the entrepreneurial journey as a non-linear path. So you can see in the dotted line is that, and Crystal, please stop annotating. But we understand the entrepreneurial journey as a moving journey and as an iterative journey, where people are learning, they are refining ideas, and they're coming back and forth from one step to the next one. Yeah. So it's not linear. It's not like I'm always moving forward. Sometimes I need to move backwards to move forward again. And we usually refer to these different types of, let's put it steps, but they're not really steps, yeah? But it's all around, you know, finding the spark inside of you, finding a challenge or a problem. That can be a social problem, it could be a commercial problem that you are quite passionate about, or that, you know, makes you unsettled, and that makes you want to move forward in that direction and to find a solution. Then at some moment in time, you would find that idea, or somebody would tell you that idea, or you would hear about the idea that you would want to pursue, and then you would embark in some sort of journey to discover if, you know, is this idea a good one? And that's what we usually call like a market validation or market fit. But in plain language, you have a spark inside you, you find an idea, or somebody tells you an idea or shares an idea with you. You go into a journey to understand, is this idea a good one? And after you have decided that this idea is a good one, you prepare to launch some sort of like product, service, whatever it is that you are trying to put out there in the market. There is some sort of post-launch and learning, reflection and adjustments and iterations and improvement of that product or service. And usually we call that phase market fit, or product market fit. And after that post-launch and learning process, you know, that never stops to happen. So that's where I'm saying, like, this is not linear, and, you know, it's not additive. So once that happens, you go into a growth mode, right? So growing your impact, growing your organization, growing your product or service, and after, and if that goes well and it goes very successfully, you will continue to a growth and maturity phase. I think in this plain language and in these very vague concepts, I think we probably all the organizations will agree. But I don't know. Can I hear if you can unmute and just say yes or no, or I agree, or if you can write in the chat like yes, this rings a bell, so that I can understand that we are on the same page. Yes, it does. Thank you, Julia. Agree, we're on the same page. Perfect. Okay. Thank you for the stars, the ticks, amazing. I love it. So moving forward, Tom, to the next slide. And if we can, and this is where it's going to start, I think, differing for some of us, or maybe it doesn't. But I think it took us a long time with the team at Impact Hub to codify this entrepreneurial journey. So I'm going to ask you to keep your minds open, and hopefully this rings a bell. And if not, I want to hear from you. Yeah. But how we usually talk about different stages in the journey. And it's really hard when you're supporting entrepreneurs, when you're a mentor, when you are an incubator, even when the journey is non-linear and there is no hard deadline where like, oh, okay, now you stopped being a startup and you're now being something else, or you stopped. We usually need to classify enterprises, because we need to put them in some sort of like boxes to, you know, make them fit in a program or in a business support program or in whatever mission that we're trying to achieve. And that's usually very challenging because, you know, different industries have different timings, and entrepreneurs are very different in their maturity models and in their in how advanced they are with their enterprises. However, we defined this method, and I think it's working well for us. So I'm hoping, and we know it's quite aligned with many organizations in the ecosystem. So it's not like Impact Hub is a crazy organization saying something completely different, but some people have, you know, these deadlines at different times in history. And when I try to explain this to people that are non from the entrepreneurial sector, I usually talk about a graduation model. So when you are in, you know, 5th grade and you graduate, and like your school says you're ready for 6th grade, for example, it's because you have achieved a certain acumen of knowledge and maturity and social skills and whatever that qualifies you to move to the next grade. So sometimes I try to think of the entrepreneurial journey in the same way. So where is the stop? Where is the deadline? Where is the, you know, what's that time in history that would make an entrepreneur move from one stage to the next one, or to qualify them to be called a startup now, for example, or a growth company. And we basically refer to 4 stages in this journey: the idea stage, the startup stage, the growth stage, and the scaling stage. But I think the idea stage is the one that, probably there's no complications in there. We usually are dealing with passionate and motivated, wannabe entrepreneurs, let's see, that have an idea. And that idea could be, it's not like me just here in my desk randomly having ideas, or like me taking a shower and having ideas of businesses. That doesn't define me as an idea stage entrepreneur. It's people with a refined idea. So an idea that is well thought, and usually has some research backing that idea, some sort of like understanding the problem, having researched the problem, understanding that there is a social or commercial need for that idea, and a proper business idea. So it's not like a 2 sentences idea, but still, mostly people in idea stage, they have an idea, but they haven't done anything to pursue that idea yet. They might have done some research. They might be very convinced that it's a very good idea, but they haven't done anything to make that happen just yet. So when we move to startup stage, which is the stage we're going to be focusing on throughout today, these are more committed entrepreneurs that have done their research, have done their homework, and have tested the idea on the market. So it doesn't mean that it's super commercially viable and that they have a strong business model, but usually throughout the startup stage, you would have tested the idea on the market, meaning that they have run some sort of like a pilot experience, or a demo, or some sort of validation and testing, and that they are trying to just test the market. So acquire the first customers, refine the business model, get the first customers in the door, or acquire the first users if it's a tech product or service. And usually by the end of the stage, because it's a stage, right? You have people in a spectrum. So you have people in early startup phase and in late startup phase. And then, you would ask me like, okay, so what's so how do I know if somebody in the late startup phase is now in growth? Like, how does it look like? And we usually focus growth on proving the model. And proving the model means expanding the operations. So making sure that that business model really works, and that you can increase your market penetration. You can increase your access to finance, your presence, in a way that makes you, in the symptoms. So what we see is that you're employing staff, you're creating formal systems, you're creating a process, you're becoming a formal business. And the growth stage is all around growing your presence. And that could mean, so from a commercial perspective, is growing your sales, your contracts, your customer base, your user acquisition, and that could mean also, in most of the cases, also means growing your access to finance, so your investment if you have any. But there are companies that go for organic growth and they don't raise investment, so that's up to everybody. And from the backend perspective, it means that you're professionalizing. So you cannot do things anymore like in a very informal way, but you need to start formalizing the way you operate, because also your customers will expect so, or your investors will expect so. And scaling, so we usually say scaling is exponential growth, because growth is all about linear growth, organic growth, so you grow a little bit every day. But scaling is about exponential scaling. So you actually, with a little bit more input, you get an exponential output. That's usually what we talk about scaling. And in the case of Impact Hub, we focus a lot, when we talk about scaling, we focus a lot on internationalization, which means how a business can go to different locations, can go global, can go regional, can go, to several places inside a country. And that's something, because we are a global network, that we care very much about, but it doesn't mean that scaling is only about internationalization. And when we think about entrepreneurs that are scaling, we think about how the leadership needs to change, the strategy needs to change, the types of partnerships that they run needs to change. So that's what we're thinking about, and those are the keywords. So if you see the orange labels, that's what the focus of the stage is for us. And if you see the purple letters, like leadership, strategy, employing staff, those are the type of support that usually entrepreneurs need in the stage, or these are the type of activities that they are looking for. And as mentioned, the journey is non-linear. It can never describe the full picture. Yeah, that's a disclaimer in orange. It's rich and diverse, and it really depends on the venture, the type of industry, the personal aspects of the entrepreneur, the story. However, it is very helpful to create these personas or inside these stages and create this narrative so that we can understand and we can create and design our programs. Because of course, it's not very effective to have, tailored made programs for each entrepreneur in each journey of their lives. You usually want to create, group experience, a cohort experience that, that can bring together people that are going through similar experiences. So understanding, what are the milestones of the phases helps us, look ahead and understand how to design our programs. So I'm going to stop here and open for questions or discussions if there's any.
Nyla, can I ask, is the goal always to get somebody from idea stage right through to scaling stage?
No, no, Tom, not in our opinion, but like folks here might disagree, right? So what I would say is the idea is always to support entrepreneurs to get to where they want to go. But just to say, not all of entrepreneurs have the ambition to become a scale up or a global enterprise with a global presence. So we work with a variety of entrepreneurs, and we work with entrepreneurs that want to become like you do want to see. So we work with social entrepreneurs, right, or impact first entrepreneurs. So that's the first disclaimer, and that's why we're hosting this workshop. And in that universe, there are some grassroots enterprises that are very community-based and that were born with a mission to change something, social or environmental impact in their communities. And by no means they want to become a global company, So I would say programs usually take entrepreneurs in one phase of their journey and help them get to the next phase. What the next phase is, that's something that the entrepreneur needs to agree with you. So, I mean, yes, if I take an entrepreneur from idea stage, probably the goal is to get them to startup phase. And if I take them at the early stage of startup, the idea is to graduate them at the late stage of startup, or to prepare them for growth, which doesn't mean force them to go into growth. Does it answer your question, Tom?
Yes, thanks.
And I got a comment here in the chat from Florian saying that actually these make sense and they are structured in a very similar way. So thank you for confirming. Any other comments or questions, or people that want to reaffirm that they also are structured in a similar way or in a completely different way? Perfect. So I just want to go a little bit deeper into the journeys, and then we're going to zoom into startup stage, as I promised. Yeah. But so we usually, when we talk about a supporting program and supporting entrepreneurs, we try to think about two things, right? One is how to support the person behind the enterprise, and what does the person need? And it could be the person or the team. It could be several people from the same team that you're supporting. And the other thing is how to support the social venture. So how to make the enterprise or the business advance. Sometimes it's not the same as how to support the person to have the best experience, or to be, to be at the very best stage in their well-being. And that's something that I think it's important to say, because, the entrepreneurial journey can be very stressful and can be very demanding for for somebody at the personal level. So we usually, when we think about programs and we think about the design of a support program, we try to think about both. What does the person need? And what does the social business, or what does the business need? And so, yeah, I wanted to bring both of the perspectives. So usually at idea stage, we're looking most of the times at people are entrepreneurs that have no experience. And most of the times, mostly for you guys here in the call, that you're working with underserved entrepreneurs or people from underprivileged communities, there is little access to support that they have in their own networks. So, I mean, of course, it can happen that you're supporting an idea stage entrepreneur that is a previous founder of another company, has a lot of knowledge, a lot of networks, but that's not usually the case, yeah? So we need to think of a persona that has no experience. They don't know what they're embarking in. They don't know how entrepreneurship is going to look like for them. They have a lot of doubts and competing needs in their lives, like supporting a family or like bringing, you know, whatever they have to do in their personal lives, and that they were not exposed to support before. In terms of the business, we are talking about about supporting the business get a basic piloting plan or testing this idea. How can we test this idea? And that can look very different for different industries. And we're looking to connect them to supporters and get them some sort of access to market. So that's what the business would need to actually get off the ground. And the entrepreneur would probably need to understand what it means to be an entrepreneur and to get some first access to support. In terms of the startup stage, the person is usually learning the basics. So the basics about managing a business, about social impact, about the industry that they're part of, unless they come from the same industry, which sometimes it is a thing. They're building the confidence, the resilience, we find a lot of entrepreneurs in startup stage with like imposter syndrome sometimes, where they feel like, oh, I don't know anything, but actually they know a lot. They are understanding how to budget for their business, how to get their business model there. And in terms of the business, it's all around testing the impact model and the business model. So for us, when we talk about impact first businesses or social enterprises, it's very important that you're not only, you know, generating a profit, but also creating an impact out there, and that you can measure that and see that, you know, the more you sell, the more impact you create, basically. So it's around validating that model. That's the stage where you understand that this is going to be viable. When you go to growth, usually, I mean, it depends on the industry, and of course it depends on the background of the entrepreneur, but usually at the beginning of growth stage is when the co-founders or other team members start going full-time, and sometimes they don't need to have a job on the side. Sometimes it happens sooner than that, but this is at the latest when people actually start living off their enterprise. And they need to, they hire their first team members or you know, they start building a team. So they need to, you know and rethink of themselves as managers sometimes. So running the team, having the strategy, holding the vision, managing the books, being able to, you know, pay salaries at the end of every month. And in terms of the business, it's all around developing and managing, you know, the growth in the revenue and the growth in the business model and the growth in the impact. So, you know, setting up the systems, all the backbones, as if we were talking about the processes, the standards, so and selling more. At the end of the day, it's all about selling more. And scaling, when an organization is scaling, usually the person, if we're talking about the founders or the co-founders, is about becoming the leader. And this is a transition. I'm not going to go too in depth into this stage because it's far away from the startup that we want to zoom in. But sometimes, you know, that's where the co-founders realize that they're not the ones that need to lead the organization forward, and they are not the best CEOs for that company. And that's a really painful and that's a really interesting transition. And it's all around, managing the strategy, the vision, where are we going, managing the growth, the risks that, you know, come with it, sometimes taking bold investment. And for the business, it's all around the sales pipeline, the contracts, the management of the systems, the account, the team, the reporting infrastructure, and then the scaling model, right? So as Luisa was saying before, it could be a replication model. Okay, so what does it mean? How do we set it up? How do we keep the spirit and the values of the solution alive? So yeah, that's the last piece I wanted to say on the journey as a whole. And now we're going to zoom in into startup. And I mean, you work with a lot of entrepreneurs in startup stage, so I don't need to tell you how it looks like. But I thought it's good to sometimes, summarize and recap on the typical barriers that are there for the journey stage. And what's different, because I know that some folks here in the call are shifting towards supporting social enterprises or social entrepreneurs. So maybe there are some things that are different, from the typical enterprises that we usually work with. So some problems might ring a bell and some might be like, oh, this is new, okay. So as a reminder, startup stage, we're looking at entrepreneurs that are starting up the venture, that are motivated by creating social impact. We're looking at people making their first sales towards like around the stage where they are professionalizing, and also like polishing and learning how to measure and how to improve the impact that they're generating, being that social, environmental, or both. And so we do have a recap of challenges from ideation stage, which are maintained throughout the startup, but things that are typical is or issues that they bring to your programs. So your startup programs, your incubation programs, they are like, Tom, I can't find sufficient customers to cover my costs. Like, so where can I find more? Like, how do I do that? How do I estimate? Like, how can I have a sustainable business model and that can grow, be optimized for growth? If they have funders or investors, which it depends on the industry and the country and the ecosystem, but sometimes it does happen that you get early funders or investors, or even it could be friends and family. It's like, how can I satisfy them? How do I keep, this is a stage where the entrepreneurs get very nervous about giving away equity sometimes, or what's the best way to fund their growth plans, or it's also around putting in place some systems, very basic usually at this stage, in terms of like some finance, supply chain, delivery, health and safety. We work in Impact Hub with a lot of food entrepreneurs, and there is like the health and safety regulations, HR, how do I do delivery? How do I do this? How do I do that? How do I know that I'm in the safe space? How do I choose? There is also the need to balance the competing demands of running the business day to day versus like, holding a vision, planning for the future, writing proposals, forecasts for investors and presentations, but also, just I'm doing a market in the weekend. Like, how do I do that? And sometimes people have jobs on the side, so, or part-time or whatever. So that's also another competing need. At a personal level, there is always the risk of burnout. People work very hard and a lot, and sometimes with a job on the side to get this going, and the fear of failure. And usually in some cultures, telling your family and your friends that you want to start a business, it's like, they take you as very risky, like how would you do that? And then then expanding beyond the initial set of customers, and from, I think, something that could be unique to social entrepreneurs or impact first entrepreneurs and could be interesting for folks in the call is putting in place an impact measurement system and reporting. And that's very important because, if you're looking for investors, or if you're whatever you're doing, you need to prove your impact. Sometimes to your customers, if they buy into your value proposition that it's attached to impact, they want to make sure that this is real impact and not, greenwashing or bullshit impact. And investors as well, I'm investing in you because I say, like, if you sell more, you create more impact. Okay, I want to see how are you measuring that, and how are you tracking? How are you going to prove to me that that this is going to happen? And that's why sometimes we say that impact entrepreneurs have it tougher, because they need to prove to an investor or to society that they can make money and generate impact. So they need to prove two things. They need to work on two systems and two reports, and nobody will forgive them or say like, oh, okay, don't make money, that's fine, just make your impact. And yeah, sometimes it's twice as challenging. And the second thing is governance. And good governance is something that we usually request from social entrepreneurs, which means, you can't be a good company and generate good impact out there and then have a shitty governance internally, or a model that doesn't protect your people or your beneficiaries. So we usually ask that the legal structures, as Alberto and Tatiana were saying in the past sessions, are well equipped to safeguard the social mission and the assets of the organization towards the social mission, and also that they have good governance systems in place, and sometimes good decision-making processes where the beneficiaries or the people that you want to support with your company are well represented as well. So that's more challenging, of course. That's more than just like, oh, be commercially viable and prove that there is a market out there.
Is some typical startup program elements often found in the Impact Hub network. So very similar to the last item, these are ingredients that you might add to your program. Not always, it's not always 100%. A lot of these sections, all of these sections intersect with one another. They're all supportive of one another. So we have 5 categories here: knowledge and skills, supportive people, space, networks, and access to capital. And actually, access to capital and funding instruments is something that we'll go into in more detail in one of the modules in September time, led by, or September, October, led by EVPA. So in terms of knowledge and skills, it's the aim is to build your program participants' skills and knowledge in entrepreneurial, business, and leadership areas. Getting more specific, this might be business planning, sales, marketing, growth hacking, financial education, impact management, as we just discussed. But the really important element here is to orientate your support around the needs of your participants. So orientating this around supporting your entrepreneur solve problems. So diagnostics will be a key element in defining what exactly you deliver here, to identify and define a problem, so that then you can put together a menu of support that supports that entrepreneur address that problem and take the next steps to where they want to go, wherever that is on the entrepreneurial journey. And then there's another line here on well-being, inclusion, and environment, because increasingly we're integrating these focuses into our programs. So as Nyla mentioned, burnout is a real risk at startup stage, and it's advised to get in there early to make sure that you support your entrepreneur, avoid getting to that stage as they're building their team. You may want to be equipping your entrepreneur, your leader, with the skills to look after the well-being of their own team as well. Inclusion is another important integration, so making sure that your programs are inclusive to various groups, as we'll explore in the second course, starting next year in much more detail, where we look at how you can sensitize your programs to specific groups. But yeah, so that's a key way to frame the support you deliver as well, because the groups you're working with, the experience your entrepreneur comes with, you'll want to respond to in how you present this support. And then environment and climate action too. So we're working a lot on circular economy this year. So how can you embed specific activities, specific conversations to make your entrepreneurs more aware of how they can make their business model, their supply chain, their general awareness a lot more supportive of moving towards more sustainable economies. Number 2 is supportive people. So these are all of the different types of people that you could connect your entrepreneur to. mentors, coaches, advisors, experts. There's some differentiation there. So you have advisors on one side and coaches on the other, mentors somewhere in between. Coaches will be very focused on supporting that entrepreneur guide their own learning journey. So identify their goal, identify their own actions, and take steps to get there. Whereas mentors and advisors would be seeing more knowledge transfer there. Peer-to-peer support is really crucial. It's one of the most valuable parts of our programs and our communities. How you connect entrepreneurs to one another to solve problems, share experiences, develop resilience, particularly if your programs are arranged around a specific sector or industry. So food, for example, peer-to-peer support can be great there. And making sure that you have a mix of internal and external support too. So your program team may be small, as we've seen many of you have 1 to 3 program members. So it's really important to take this as an opportunity to embed your program in your local community. So source mentors and coaches and experts from the outside world as well, so that you don't have to know everything about compliance and legalities relating to specific sectors. You can bring in the advisors that hold that knowledge already. And this might all be provided in a variety of formats, one-to-one, group, or events-based, for example, masterclasses or a facilitated community of practice. Third is space. So at Impact Hub, we offer membership. You may have an offer like that with your incubator or not, but space is a key part of the Impact Hub model. Financial and non-financial support is really important, but often at Impact Hub would have co-working space provided to those participants who are engaging in programs as a way to immerse themselves in a wider community, make connections. But then also, how can you use your space and use that as a platform for those entrepreneurs when they're holding meetings, holding events, trying to promote themselves with other partners or desired partners as well. Networks, of course, equally as important as all of these other elements too. So facilitating networking events, sharing knowledge and experiences, connecting your entrepreneurs with potential collaborators and customers and suppliers as well, bringing together and curating different interest groups based on the topic of your program, if there is one. And alumni communities is a really powerful component to integrate into your programs too. So all of those participants that have gone through your programs, maintaining communication, maintaining a dynamic environment for those participants to continue talking to one another, but also to become those supportive people for your future participants as well. So people who have experienced your programs, who've developed, who you support develop, how can they give back and offer coaching, mentoring, advisory services to your future cohorts? Exposure and platforming is really valued by our program participants. So Impact Hub's using the leverage they have to platform their entrepreneurs, to help them raise their profile, either through social media, through events, through connecting one-to-one, building one-to-one relationships, and then thinking about the broader network. So at Impact Hub, and with all of our networks here today, we're all part of networks. So you may be delivering an incubation service in your locality, but you're part of a broader network. So how can you leverage that to create a more translocal approach to supporting your entrepreneurs? And then there's access to capital, which we will go into in more detail in the future modules. But how do you connect your entrepreneur with the right fundraising, financing, investment strategy and offer for them? So being very clear on what the strategy is, and then how can you facilitate the access to the capital that's going to support achieving and working towards that strategy. In some programs where you're working with entrepreneurs, particularly at startup stage, particularly in programs that are focused on supporting underrepresented groups, bursaries could be really important here in supporting your entrepreneur engage. As Nina said earlier, they may have lots of other things going on in their lives. They may have second or third jobs. So how can you use bursaries to make your programs more accessible? But also it's one option is to ask for financial contribution from your entrepreneur as well, to demonstrate they're at a certain stage in their journey, and to bring in the right entrepreneur that you're trying to target. So that very much depends on who you're working with and what you want to achieve with them, and what their barriers are and what their assets are at that stage.
So my answer was, so personally at Impact Hub, we run different types of startup stage programs. We try to make them very specific. So we try to do it, if possible, like industry specific sometimes, like all food entrepreneurs working in this sector, blah, 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 or all entrepreneurs that are, you know, working in tech or in circular economy, or so that we can, you know, have a specific curriculum that makes sense for them. So in terms of the curriculum, there are some things that are always present in terms of business skills, and there are some things that are specific and new. So no curriculum will be exactly the same as the other. So in some programs, we do have a focus on product design, and in some others, maybe it's not necessary. And also we try to build it modular. So some content will be delivered in workshops and it's the same for everybody. And then we try to always do it, as we said, a diagnostic, and then a development plan, and have a budget for each entrepreneur to get what they need. So for example, in a cohort, we would have, let's say, 5 workshops that are for everybody. And then each entrepreneur will have a coach or a mentor, and they would go through a diagnostic. They would identify the goals for their incubation period. And then maybe one entrepreneur needs more support with their commercial, I don't know, the commercial strategy or the branding. And the other entrepreneur, yeah, the product design is not, I don't know, they didn't receive very good feedback. We try to get them a mentor from a similar industry that it's more advanced in their journey, or somebody, you know, quite successful in the industry, so that they can get true feedback. And everybody gets usually a budget, which is in hours of support. So you get 10 hours of support and you get a menu, as Tom was saying. So you can pick and choose and say like, okay, I would like to discuss with a coach about this. I would like to get a, you know, I would like to talk to a branding agency about this and that. So I can't say yes or no. I would say that each curriculum is designed in a specific way based on the first our understanding of the problem definition and where the entrepreneurs are in their journey and where the industry is standing. But also we take very seriously the diagnostics at the beginning of the program, trying to understand like how the cohort looks like and what the entrepreneurs need, and try to build a modular, you know, curriculum so that people can pick and choose. And the first thing I need to say is that as a network, we decided not to use this terminology 2 years ago. We had a very heated discussion because incubation and acceleration are used differently in different parts of the world. Whereas in Europe, incubation is usually more similar to a startup stage program, and acceleration is more of a growth stage program. For example, in the US, they are using distinctively, and usually incubation has more of a space component where entrepreneurs are kind of like nesting in a space, whereas acceleration has more of a financial component where like sometimes the accelerators take equity from the entrepreneurs. So what we decided to do is to disregard that definition and use startup stage programs and growth stage programs. That's what you're going to hear from us. But for the purpose of better incubation and liaise, we are using incubation as startup stage programming. And that could include financial contributions or not. That could include access to space and an office space or not. That's up to each organization. Inviting our first guest of today, we're going to have 2 guests. The first one is Julia. Tom, if we can go to the next one. So Julia from Impact Hub Istanbul, and she's going to tell us a little bit more about how they design the programs for local underserved communities. So we're going to hear from first Julia in terms of like something that is very local and tailored to a specific community and how to approach the design. And then we're going to hear from Rachel on a different experience on how a program had to change its design to be replicated in different countries across the globe. So we're going to hear first the local and then the global experience of design. Yeah, Julia, the floor is yours. If you have slides, let us know and we will stop sharing so you can share your screen.
Yeah, please. I do have them. Not too many, but it's just to go through that together. Hi, everyone. Thanks, first of all, for the invite to take part in this session. I'm actually going to build on some of the comments that came up in the exercise. So I hope that's going to be a further reflection. As you were saying, I'm based in Impact Hub Istanbul. I'm project coordinator, but I also support the design of programs and initiatives, especially with a focus on the refugee and migrant community in Turkey. So I'm just gonna mention some of the activities we carried out and try also to highlight some takeaways, some best practices that we harvested over the years. We have, sorry, just a second. My screen is blocking, okay. Here are a few of the initiatives that we carried out over the years. I'm not going to go into details about those, but I just wanted to highlight that when we talk about inclusive programming and support for entrepreneurs, we are basically referring to something that can be applied to any of the entrepreneur journey phases. So we're not just looking at the startup phase, growing phase, but for example, we have Accelerate 2030, which is a scaling program, and still we have like inclusive support for refugee and migrant community. And at the same time, we are looking at any of the sectors or any field. So we had Tech Camp for media entrepreneurs and journalists from the Turkish and Syrian community, or Tech for Refugees, which was obviously focused on digital enterprises. So just to start to say that inclusive support can be applied to different phases and fields. I'm gonna go into more detail about Build Your Future, which is one of our programs. It's particularly relevant here because it's related to the end of ideation phase and early stage business support for this program. If you look at this as an overview of the program, you can see that some of the components are the same. Like when we look at designing refugee entrepreneurship support program, we are not trying to revolutionize our programming. Like we don't need to build something from scratch and completely different from what we do. But the important thing is to make every single phase, every single component inclusive. So we basically put some ads-on to our normal programming, starting even from the selection phase. So we don't just send out an online application form, but we try also to have live conversation with the participants that we think are most suitable for the program. And also we try to work with the grassroots organizations to reach out to the best audience and our target audience. In terms of geography, we try not to just focus on our own city and usual network, but also try to reach out to those places where refugee communities are living. Moreover, we can look at the support. So one key thing is researching and like providing a need assessment, trying to understand exactly what we're talking about, because of course we're not necessarily part of the community we're trying to serve. So first thing is research. There's many like papers and university background that we can use, but also we complement that with some needs assessment on the spot. And also another point is the type of support that is provided. Like for vulnerable people, and especially for refugee and migrant communities, we work a lot in building connections, like personal connections with mentors, with networks. And we try to move forward also with meetups, even after the end of the programs, that can actually keep that network going and keep that support going. This is because we basically, over these years of experience, we identified that there are some extra barriers that are not just the usual barriers to businesses, sustainability and success, but there are some extra ones that we need to take into account. So I'm just naming a few, like intersectionality basically means that you can be a refugee, you can be a migrant, but on top of that, you are maybe a young person or a person with disability or a woman. So we need to take into account also other possible vulnerabilities related to that. There's also a big constraint, which is the legal and policy framework. Like we cannot control the legal status of refugee and migrants. We need to comply with the laws. In some countries, it's actually easier to work. In Turkey, for example, the Syrian community has the right to leave, the permit of stay, the access to support and health system, or they can open a bank account. I mean, obviously, these are silly things for us, but when working with such a community, we need to take into account that. And then the general social cohesion issue, which is how much these communities are integrated, how much are accepted, if there are barriers or discrimination. So all of these are extra things that we need to somehow embed in our programming with some kind of holistic approach. So we are not looking at considering entrepreneurs as our beneficiaries, but people, human beings that have been through a journey, often a physical journey to another country. And we cannot just look at support from the entrepreneurial point of view. And I'm just gonna end this with some best practices. I have to say that this is not just my own work and harvest, but I'm part of the community of practice in the Liaise program. So I'm also thanking some of my group members that I see here. We tried to come up with some best practices for each of the stages of the design. So when we actually just have an overview of the program, we scout for participants, we think of the support to be provided. And basically some of the points that emerge here, as I said, is that we are not just looking at pure entrepreneurial support, like in some cases we need to support language skills or digital skills, and also the fact that we need to build a community of refugees and migrants. And we also try to connect those that made it, that were successful in this journey, to become mentors for those that are trying to start it and to kick off with their own businesses. And finally, just the final point is networks. So how much can we actually connect this group with the key stakeholders, which for other entrepreneurs might be really accessible and very easy to reach out to. But when looking at vulnerable groups, this can be a challenge. So I know we have a time limit here. I hope this was clear. I just tried to sum up what we've been through in these past years, but I'm also here for questions if you have any.
Amazing presentation. Thank you so much, Julia, for sharing your experience and how you integrate diversity, equity, and inclusion into your usual programming to support refugees and migrants in Istanbul. Now we want to move to the other end. So how do you adapt program designs when you want to replicate the model in different countries and in different cultures? And we have a special guest, which is Rachel. She used to work at Impact Hub Zurich running the Impact Hub Fellowship. And now she's the CEO of Instituto Now, who is actually collaborating with Liaise and with Better Incubation program very closely, as she's helping us design the experience of the communities of practice. So now you get to see one of the main characters from the back end of Better Incubation coming to the front end in a way. Welcome, Rachel, and thank you so much for connecting with us so early. Yeah, we know it's super early in Brazil, so good morning.
Good afternoon, most of you. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and to be able to travel back in time a little bit with you. So I look forward to sharing this story with you. I'll just share my screen so I can change slides at my own speed. Let me just adjust this so it's not too big. And then we can get started. So, as Naila already shared, we're going to talk a little bit about how to scale programs and really kind of also localize them in the process. And in this story, I'm taking you back 10 years to 2011. And Naila might even not know this, because this story for me started at WWF. I was interning there, and my responsibility was to support social entrepreneurship initiatives. And I didn't even know WWF was doing that at the time. But they had just started a collaboration with a certain impact hub in Switzerland. So what came out of that was the first Impact Hub Fellowship, looking for innovative ideas, social entrepreneurship ideas that would contribute to the mission of WWF. So at the time, and very soon, I changed sides and I joined the Impact Hub and continued supporting this initiative. So at the beginning, the idea was very simple. It was a simple incubation program for sustainable ideas, or ideas that would support biodiversity in Switzerland. And there would be ideally more than 30 applicants, 5 to 8 finalists. And at the end, you would select a fellow and 2 runner-ups who would get the prizes that you can see here: seed funding, workspace, coaching, and network. And that first program was a very big success, which is why it became very clear to Impact Hub Zurich that this could be a format that could be replicated and that could be done also with other partners. So the conversation started with very different, let's say, players. One of them was a Swiss company, Swisscom, ICT company. On the other hand, there was a foundation looking at supporting the development of children and youth in the country. And with both of them, a first fellowship started and further fellowships followed. You can see there's a second edition and the 4th edition on the one on the side. So a lot of fellowships started happening, and they always went back to this formula. So the idea was, we're going to keep this program exactly the same, and sometimes there would be different fellowships happening in parallel in Switzerland. So we would have the Impact Hub full of social entrepreneurs, which it was at a very initial stage of the Impact Hub. So that was really nice to have this vibrant community due to these engaged social entrepreneurs. Something happened about 2 to 3 years later, when the conversation started with another company who is interested in longer lives and in health topics. It's 2 companies, 2 insurance companies in Switzerland. And they said, well, we're not just active in Switzerland. And Impact Hub at that time already had, I think, Impact Hubs in 30 countries across the globe. And they said, well, we actually want to do it in different Impact Hubs. Now, this was a big challenge, right? So at that time, a small team was created to support the implementation of the program in different locations. The Impact Hub Fellowship Association at the time it was called. And the Impact Hub Fellowship really was done in 5 different locations. I know one of them was in Venezuela, another one was in Milan. So the program really started to take an international focus. And here you can see how that also started creating a community of social entrepreneurs that had gone through the program that, you know, was quite diverse, and they could also start to connect with each other. But this was a new challenge for the program, because some of these programs that started happening, and it wasn't just the first 5 that were done with AXA and Swiss Re, other programs started happening, and they started taking different shapes. So I'm going to give you 2 examples here of Impact Hubs that, you know, adapted to different needs. Let's take the example here on the left side in Bujumbura. They didn't really have a space yet at the time. They were at the very initial stage of building an Impact Hub. So the program suddenly didn't have one of the main pillars of bringing the people together to work in the same workspace. And on the right side, you can see an example from Munich, where they created a fellowship, but they didn't call it a fellowship. So was this still a fellowship? They also increased the number of participants that would go through the program and changed a little bit the structure, adapting it really to the needs and to the experience that they already had with other incubation programs locally. What we did started doing then at the time, and at this time I had already changed my role again, and I joined this Impact Hub Fellowship Association that supported the implementation of the program in these different locations across the globe. And we started collecting that input, and we really wanted to bring these people together and also learn from them. We sometimes also asked them to share our templates with us, so we could see how they implemented the program and how they changed it. And here you can see a couple of examples. You could see that Milan was saying, well, we didn't really announce the winners. It was just something internal that was important for the community. Whereas on the other side, in Caracas, they looked for a lot of visibility, right? And this is just some of these small changes. Some of them started adding new topics in the workshops, and then later decided, no, that didn't make sense. And this one is called Impact Hub Africa, because that was the regional manager for these different programs that were happening across Africa that were, that shared with us the input or the experience. And then you can also see that sometimes these impact hubs had to adapt to the ideas and suggestions of their partners, right? Because every Impact Hub fellowship was done with a partner. So in this case, in Caracas, they suddenly decided to, jump to 4 fellows instead of just 3, and they had to adapt the program accordingly. The program had grown. So after 5 years, 15 Impact Hubs had been involved, and that's really across the globe, or at the Impact Hub globe at the time. So I think it was really a diverse group, going from Bogota to Sao Paulo to Madrid, and 28 fellowships had happened. So that was really a big number. And that was the reason why we decided to look at what was working and if maybe we needed to make an adjustment. Because at that time, with the Munichs of the world, we started to have these conversations that weren't easy to say, well, you're not allowed, you have to call it a fellowship. And we started questioning this approach as the Impact Hub Fellowship Association. So then we created a different approach, which we called the MVP approach. We created a blueprint, which is a simple document. And instead of saying to everybody, you have to do exactly the same fellowship as Zurich has done in the past, we realized that didn't make sense. So the blueprint approach was really to say, here are some ingredients, adapt them to your local reality, adapt them to your previous experiences, and we're going to give you the support to make it happen. And this topic of flexibility really became the core element of how we decided to scale the program. There was still a basic idea. So at that time, even the fellowship the basic fellowship had changed and had learned from all these different experiences. When in the past, we would, have the first phase, which was the ideation phase. And that was really already part of the program, because the idea would be that all applicants would learn something in the program. And then the winner would be decided and would kind of, get support for a longer period. Now the program has changed, and there would be a selection of 3 or 6 cohort participants. And only after 3 months, we would decide who is the fellow, because some project after 3 months, maybe they wouldn't be so engaged anymore, right? So it was a much better way of deciding about the winner as such, if we would give them some time to test things out. So I said we would create this blueprint and would really create support structures around that. So the blueprint wasn't just a document, it was also a community. So we brought the different Impact Hub Fellowship managers in the different locations together on a Slack space. We had a big library of templates and guidelines that was co-created. So we collected it from the different locations. And there was also the option to have a one-on-one support to really kind of newcomers could have coaching in how to implement the fellowship. And that really meant that now with the blueprint, it was much easier to scale. So the WWF joined forces again with the Impact Hub and said, we're going to support 5 fellowships across the globe, but we're not going to do that on our own. So each Impact Hub had to find another partner. So Bulgaria was the partner in Milan, for example, who would pay part of the fee and would also support this local outreach, right? The partners would always have a specific role in supporting some of the challenging parts of the program. I'm going to leave you with a couple of learnings or a couple of key insights that I think are relevant for anybody who would be wanting to, scale a program and really look at how to localize it for local needs. The first one is having a clear understanding of requirements. And I think that's something we try to make clear with the blueprint. What do you need to have to be able to run a fellowship? And even here, of course, there is a certain flexibility, but you can see here that in the blueprint, we divided it into must-haves and nice-to-haves. And I think that really helped somebody decide if they can run or not a fellowship. The second part is about the tools and templates. It's much easier to replicate a program and even to adapt it if you have a template that you can, change, but you don't have to start from scratch with everything. So we had a template on how to do the assessment or on how to set up your website. And that would just simplify the job of creating a fellowship, especially for new impact hubs. Because at the time, the Impact Hub network was growing, and this was a great tool for Impact Hub to have a first incubation program in their local reality. Another important point is to have a clear understanding of what is fixed and what is flexible. Again, I'm learning from the experience where, we would say, no, still Impact Hub branding or a basic Impact Hub branding is fixed. I think Munich really was the only one that didn't have that feel, just so we would also have a united story. And you could also say, look, we're like this other fellowship. So it would really help in the storytelling and would help afterwards to convince other partners maybe to help us implement these kinds of programs. And you can see another couple of points. We would never let go of the social impact focus, right? This was about social entrepreneurship. The idea would be that participants would always win the same kind of support, and that there would be a notion of collaboration among the cohort. I think this is also really important to bring in the values of the Impact Hub community, that if you're together in a cohort, you're not there to win or to be better than the others. It's really about learning from and with each other. And that had to do a lot with the formats that we have, where you would share as a social entrepreneur your challenges, and it would really be a shared effort to exchange best practices and to solve these problems together. And I think, to me, that's maybe the most powerful element of the fellowship that I've seen, how these different social entrepreneurs really became friends along the process and would be their first go-to support structure for each other. And then on the other side, you can see a lot of things that are flexible. Who selects which ideas are going to be invited to pitch? It depends. For a lot of these programs, eventually there was a crowdsourcing platform being used. So people could support, submit their ideas, and it really was the community, whatever that meant, in this case, often the WWF community, who would decide which are the best ideas. In other cases, it was the partner, etc., etc. So this is here just to give you a couple of examples for you to understand that it became much more clear for Impact Hubs what they could adapt and what they should keep to the core. And the last part, again, I think is very close to the way Impact Hub does its work, which was about creating the spaces for mutual learning. I talked about the Slack space, but there's also a lot of gatherings and a lot of small meetings and online meetups, etc., that really helped Impact Hubs, especially that were new to incubation, learn from the more experienced ones and really exchange best practices. And it starts to also give you a bit of a feeling of being part of something bigger, right? If you're implementing a program that has been done before. And I think Julia talked about the Accelerated 2030, which is another program that followed afterwards that benefited from the fellowship experience in that sense. I think that's already the end of my presentation and the end of the time, but I'm very curious to hear your questions, and I'm gonna